lot going on this
Yeah,
past.
theater and science, who seem to be.
Well, welcome to the regular meeting of the Blacksburg Planning Commission, which are held on the first Tuesday of each month here at 6:30 PM, here at the Roger E. Heads Past Chambers of the Blacksburg Municipal Building. Citizens may address the Planning Commission during specified times on the agenda and are requested to adhere to the following. Speak at the podium, state your name and address, direct comments only to the commission. Please limit speaking time to a maximum of 3 minutes and speak only once during a specific hearing or comment period. Please silence all cell phones, show respect for all speakers, and allow all opinions to be expressed in a tolerant atmosphere. With that, we will call the meeting to order, and
Casey will be doing the roll call.
Casey will conduct a roll call.
Britt, Holly, Ehrman,
Here.
Ford,
Here.
Jones, Kassoff,
Here.
C,
Here.
Reinhardt,
Here.
Walker.
Here, sorry.
We have a quorum. Wonderful. We'll move on to our consent agenda. There's 2 items on the consent agenda this week. One is the approval of the Planning Commission minutes from June 4th, 2024. And the second is zoning ordinance amendment ZOA 60, ordinance 2001, which is an amendment to amend the text of the town zoning ordinance to create a new downtown northwest zoning district for the area bounded by North Main Street, Turner Street, and Price's Fork Road. And the action there is to schedule a public hearing for August 6, 2024. Do we have a motion?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm abstaining from any votes this evening.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to our public hearings. Our first public hearing is zoning ordinance ZOA 61, an amendment to the town of Blacksburg zoning ordinance to create a new small lot development option in the R4 low-density residential zoning district to allow for smaller lot sizes. And we have a staff presentation by Carly Casper.
This is a zoning ordinance amendment to the R4 zoning district to allow for a small lot development option. I'll start with a little bit of background. This slide really covers that we have a housing shortage, a shortage of housing options in the town, like many communities across the country, and that the comprehensive plan suggests revisions to the zoning ordinance, including to lot size, density, layout, and reduced parking requirements as a strategy to address this issue. The next several slides were covered around a memo from Camiros, who is a consultant that's been working with us on this project for some time. These were covered in a January 2023 memo and were also provided in the staff report as well as on the Let's Talk website page that we have for this project. The idea here is we're just trying to understand the context of the districts that we are working within. These are the existing districts for the zoning ordinance with the town, the residential districts that are on the lower end of the density. We have the RR1 district, which doesn't have minimum lot sizes, but the density is 1 unit per acre. RR2 requires a planned development with a minimum size of 30 acres, so that's a pretty significant area. R4, which this would be a development option under, currently requires a 10,000 square foot lot or 7,500 square feet for the open space overlay. The R5 district allows for an 8,500 square foot lot for single family and some attached units. And the Old Town Residential Zoning District allows for a 7,500 square foot lot for single family and some attached housing as well. We look at some of the nearby areas, including areas within town as well as within Roanoke and a couple neighboring communities in Kentucky and North Carolina, and looking at the different types of small lots that could be possible and are using these as an example for how the ordinance and the text was developed. The first is Airport Acres, which has average lot sizes of 8,500 square feet. That is an R4 district, but it is also considered non-conforming because the lot sizes are smaller than the 10,000 square foot minimum. We also look at Eccles Village, which was developed through a planned residential development that has 3,500 square foot lots. Then we'll also look at the village at Toms Creek, which ranges from 3,500 square feet to 5,000 square foot lots and does include some attached housing in the form of duplexes and townhomes. Two examples out of Roanoke are the Wasena neighborhood and the Grandin Village neighborhood, which have around 6,500 to 7,000 square foot lots. Norton Commons is a transit development in Louisville, Kentucky. Those lot sizes vary but can be as small as 1/10 of an acre. And Antiquity in Cornelius, North Carolina, those lot sizes also vary but can be as small as 2,500 square feet. Some of these examples do allow, the last two in particular, allow for greater lot coverage in combination with the small lots than what's being proposed within the ordinance here. In the next several slides, I'll just walk through the proposed ordinance. We start with the applicability and uses. Again, this is a proposed option within the R4 low-density residential zoning district. Sites that are eligible would be of 2 or more contiguous developable acres that are held in common ownership. The ordinance itself, this amendment, was not designed for infill application and so would not apply to infill lots. It does allow for single-family detached on smaller lot sizes, as well as allowing for 2-family dwellings, duplexes, and townhouses, only when served by alley access, and additional standards apply, which I will cover later in the presentation. This would be by, ordinance would allow for by right development of these uses, but it must meet all of the standards. This map was included in your staff report and is also found on the web. It is shows the areas of eligibility. Currently, this is based on March 2024 parcel information. So it is a snapshot of parcels that may be eligible. I would just note here that areas of eligibility can change over time as properties are bought and sold. So again, this is just a snapshot of what would be eligible based on that information. The areas in yellow are the ones that show 2 or greater acres within R4. The R4 areas themselves are bounded by the dark black outline. And then there are several different hatches that come over the yellow. Some show town parks, also shows developed schools or churches that have a structure on the site, Virginia Tech property, and open space and cemeteries. And those are just intended to give context of things that may be more or less likely to be developed. Next, I'll cover the individual lot standards that are being proposed. For lot area, we are looking at less than 10,000 square foot lots, and also less than the open space overlay, which does allow for that 7,500 square foot lot in the R4. So the range that we're considering here goes from 3,000 square feet to 7,500 square feet. It also includes lot frontage, which the standard there is 30 feet for the smaller end of those lots and 40 feet for the greater end of those lots. The current R4 standard for lot frontage is also 40 feet. And you'll see through several of these standards that there are kind of 2 different parts to it. It is considered to be a sliding scale, and that's intended to keep the homes and the design of the subdivision to keep things proportional. When you have a smaller lot, you'd have a smaller home with some of those smaller setbacks and smaller frontages, and then when you have a larger lot, it would allow for a little bit larger home as well. The next piece is for setbacks. These were also included in the draft text of the ordinance. The front setback would be 10 feet, but there's also a maximum of no more than 30 feet, and that's to keep the homes that are built addressing the street and create a sense of scale and pedestrian environment. Side setbacks would be smaller than currently allowed in R4, with the smallest lots having 3-foot side setbacks and the larger lots having 5-foot setbacks in comparison to 10 feet with the typical R4 lots. Corner sides are a little bit smaller as well, 5 feet and 10 feet in comparison to 20. The rear setback is unchanged with 25 feet. The next standard is around height. This does allow for 30 feet of height or 2.5 stories, and then does allow for a little bit of change on that when you're looking at some steep topography. For lot coverage standards, the proposals are for 65% for the smaller end of lots and 60% for the larger end of lots. Current lot coverage for R4 is around 45%. And in this instance for the option, we've eliminated the use of the floor to area ratio and instead are regulating by the footprint of the principal structure, that kind of ground floor footprint there. And that would be 25% of the lot. And then there's also a not to exceed maximum. And again, that's to keep the homes proportional on the lots that they are on. This is an image just showing what a typical lot could look like with a 3,000 square foot lot size. So this would be the smallest end of the development option, a minimum of 30 feet of frontage, then you'd be looking at about 100 feet of lot depth. This does show the minimum setback as well as the maximum height and the maximum footprint, which would be 25% of the lot here, which is 750 square feet. You're looking at around an 1,800 square foot home. Next, we go through the other development standards. There is a unit mix percentage, a maximum percentage of duplexes and townhouses. This is intended to ensure that when small lot developments are proposed, that they contain a mix of units, if any attached type units are included, so that it is still in keeping with the nature of the R4 district as a whole. For developments of less than 5 acres, this would be no more than 50% attached units. And for proposals of 5 acres or more, that would be no more than 30% attached. The 30% attached is pretty similar to the ratio for the developed area at the village at Toms Creek, to give you a sense of that. No buffer yard is required adjacent to a small lot development. That is in line with the existing R4 zoning, which does not require a buffer between R4 and other zones like R5, Old Town Residential, or Planned Residential. With respect to occupancy, this is a more restrictive standard for small lots to mitigate the impacts of the greater intensity and density that's expected to develop. So the standard here would be a family plus 1 or no more than 2 unrelated individuals per unit. With respect to parking and driveways, no off-street parking is required. While that is the case, you'll see later in the street design standards that if no off-street parking is proposed, it may require a wider street to ensure that we allow for on-street parking as needed. If parking is provided, there's a maximum of 1 driveway per lot. Since the lots are fairly small, we're looking at narrower curb cuts and we don't want to see more than 1 driveway on a lot. There is also a limitation on the overall width of the driveway, and there is a minimum length required to ensure that the cars are not overhanging the sidewalk and that we have a good pedestrian experience. There are also different regulations for alley-served units that are also included in the text.
Should we take a moment?
It's like they might be at the stoplight. The next section here is for front-facing garages. This came out of the discussion at Planning Commission work session over several work sessions. There is a proposed maximum width for front-facing garages, which would be 40% of the total facade width. And those front-facing garages must also be set back from the front building line by at least 4 feet. That includes for attached or detached garages. I have an image kind of showing what that would entail. This does still allow for larger garages, but it would require a larger lot to accommodate a larger garage and a larger house. It also does still allow prefer garages that would be accessed from the rear of the property or for side loading garages as well. With respect to street design, narrower street pavement widths will be allowed at 24 feet. Greater street width may be required if parking is allowed on the street or if the traffic generation numbers dictate that. Streets should also be designed to 15 miles per hour. This is in line with other regulations to ensure that we're creating a pedestrian-friendly streetscape. Rolled curb or CG6 curb and gutter are also allowed. And the minimum right-of-way widths vary between 40 and 50 feet depending on the width of the street that's proposed. And sidewalks are required on both sides of the street, again, due to the kind of increase in density and intensity expected. Alleys also have design standards for the small lot option. Alleys are required to serve any attached units that are proposed. They can only access the rear yards, not for the sides and front yards. There is a minimum alley length, and then alleys longer than 250 feet are required to reconnect to a street, so we're trying to avoid a series of dead-end alleys, and then alleys must be asphalt. This alley design also allows for the attached units to not have driveways every few feet along the fronts. With respect to open space, R4 requires a 10% minimum dedication. This also applies to the small lot development option. When attached units are proposed, 10 or more of those cumulatively, then 15% minimum open space is triggered. We're looking to create meaningful open space here, so it is more restrictive than the other, the standard R4, where open space here cannot be in required yards. It also requires a 5,000 square foot area dedicated to community recreation, and then it scales up. For every 5 acres, an additional 5,000 square feet of community recreation is needed. Again, this is more restrictive, but it is intended to create meaningful open space with the greater intensity. Next, I'll cover unit design requirements. These are also more stringent than standards for single-family development, which really doesn't have use and design standards. And again, this is to ensure kind of the high-quality design that we're looking for in these more intense neighborhoods. So this includes having an open porch or primary entrance facing the street with a visually dominant entry. It allows for porches to encroach into the setbacks to create that pedestrian feel. Windows are required on all street-facing facades, and a minimum 10% transparency is required on those street-facing facades. Townhouses are also required to be dispersed throughout the development when there are more than 3 buildings of 6 units each. So it's just intended to kind of keep a mix of those. We don't want to have one concentrated area that's all the attached units, but we prefer to see them dispersed. That covers the standards. I'll just go briefly over the schedule. We have been working on this for some time. This did see 2 town council referring resolutions as the work progressed. There have been several work sessions, 3 of those with Planning Commission to cover the different aspects of the ordinance text and make revisions and updates. There was a public input meeting held in March of 2024, and the notes and the sign-in sheets were provided to you in your packet, and they've also been available on the Let's Talk Blacksburg webpage for this. Tonight is the Planning Commission public hearing. Town Council also had a work session on this topic this morning, and we'll have 1 or more additional work sessions before it goes to a Town Council public hearing. In addition to the typical public input meeting that we held, we also provided the draft ordinance text to the Home Builders Association for feedback and attended a meeting for questions and comments, and they were generally supportive of the amendment. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Go back to the map. This is something I've talked about at work sessions before, but I just want to say one more time. It's a little, first of all, congratulations on a lot of work to make something that is aligned with the town master plan's focus on walkability, quality of life, and affordability. But to call this a snapshot in time, when it includes VT properties and town parks that, you know, in theory could be developed in some later time, there's a little bit of a disconnect in that phrase. Maybe that phrase can go away. It's not a snapshot in time, it's kind of what could happen in, you know, in some theory when if the town sold its parks away to developers, which seems highly unlikely. And so as we start to think about other zoning changes, I would just kind of express my my position that we don't have to just do it on big lots where it's more politically expedient because there's no one nearby, that we ought to be thinking about doing it as big lots and infill and everything in between.
My understanding was that the snapshot that you're describing is because the properties themselves can get bought and sold, so that literally if somebody amassed ownership of other parts of R4, and I had also spoken up about sort of the slightly incremental approach to this in the sense of because the initial impulse had been about these areas as opposed to infill, and that was sort of the trajectory we're on. And I have to say I'm incredibly impressed with, and also just impressed with the process on this, the sort of iterative, thoughtful process, and looking at models and so on. And I'm excited about moving forward, even though there's more to be done, and I assume will be done. But there are plenty of those places that are, I mean, it does look like, oh, you know, that they're out, but those are very near to very vibrant neighborhoods. I mean, they will become extension of existing vibrant neighborhoods, which I think is exciting. I had one perhaps really ignorant question, which is about alleys and what does it mean, or what is the reason for why alleys have to be asphalt? And does that include, like, could they be whatever that fabulous permeable surfacing is?
So when we worked on developing that standard, we do have a standard that allows for different surfaces for alleys typically in town. But I think the idea here is that the level of intensity that would be included when we're talking about, in particular, it's for attached units. There's concern over the amount of trips that would go over that and the maintenance of those. And being sure that they'll be well maintained over time, and as well as allowing for service vehicles to serve the alleys. So that was the primary conversation, and that was done in coordination with engineering staff. I'd say that's kind of the reasoning behind it.
Thank you.
So if a developer or a homeowner or whatever had 2 1.5 acre lots that were adjacent, what would the process be by where they could turn that into a 3 acre lot? Would they have to get permission from the town, or by right, once they're next to each other, they can combine them and
It's by right once they're next to each other.
if they're next to each other, even if they're currently separate lots, they could just buy,
Correct.
I could buy my neighbor's lot, and then that would be a 2 acre lot. And that's
Yeah, so it just requires that they be 2 or more contiguous acres, and they need to be held under that common ownership. So that's maybe just a further clarification of the idea that this is just a snapshot for us, or a point in time, is that as parcel ownership changes, people can accumulate parcels. So we just want to be clear that any accumulation of those to 2 acres or more within the black outlined areas can be eligible for this. The only caveat to that is that they be developable, which is the reason, the reason we have a hatching on open space and cemeteries, because those aren't considered developable acreage. But yes, parcel accumulation is absolutely possible.
So to follow up, if I have a house on my 1.5 acres and someone has a house on their 1.5 acres, but those 2 houses don't meet the requirements, do I have to tear those houses down before I put up the high density, or could I leave the existing ones? It's 2 acres total, and then those houses are exempted and can kind of get tucked in with the rest of it.
That's a hard question to answer without seeing a layout for it. The existing units would need to meet some standards. So whether that be the small lot development option standards or the existing R4 development standards, you would not be able to develop it and make those non-conforming. That's maybe the best way I could describe it.
So then would they have to have 10,000 square feet as their lot because they're non-conforming? Because then the whole thing falls apart again, you know, then the whole thing kind of unravels again. If I have 2 houses on an acre, and each one's on an acre and a half, and each one needs 10,000 square feet for its lot, otherwise it's non-conforming, then there's not really much left, especially if it needs 30 foot of frontage and so forth.
So again, it's really hard to answer that question without knowing the specifics of them, because it's possible they might not have to have a 10,000 square foot lot if they meet a different standard like the one contained in the small lot option. But it depends on the size of the house and the nature of where they are on the lots and how the subdivision is designed. So it's hard to answer that. I'd say there are structures and there are instances on this map that do include some lots that are what I'll call underdeveloped, because they are not developed to the maximum currently allowed, even the R4 maximum. So some of those, and what you're describing, if those are R4 parcels, those are undeveloped if they're, an acre and a half and only have one house.
Right, but if
Because
the
you
house
can-
is like, what's the minimum setback, for instance? What's the maximum setback right now? 30 feet from the front, 20 feet?
For the small lot development option, between 10 and 30 feet.
So if you had a house that was 35 feet setback already, you could not, that would be non-conforming, and then that would have to have it, in theory. I'm not trying
Yes.
to peg you down, I'm just trying to
No,
say.
I understand that.
If the idea of this is to allow someone by right to develop something that's 2 acres, and that 2 people can buy 2 things and put together, it would be a shame if the unintended consequence was for them to do it, they had to tear down the existing 2 perfectly good houses.
I think what Colleen's referring to is all based on layout. So in other words, you could come in with a structured layout that would conform with the small lot subdivision. For example, your 35-foot setback. You put a road in front of the house.
But
that would
presumably it's
create
already
this-
on a road.
Well, you're still going to have 35,000, you're still going to have 32,000 square feet, even if it had to have a 10,000 square foot lot to develop. It's really interesting points, and I think that you're making an interesting point, but it's a little bit unanswerable in the absence of some design. I think that.
But aren't we then back to it not being by right? Then they have to submit a design and it has to go through the process? Or was
The
that always
admi-
going
the
to be the case? That was
administrative-
always going to be the case.
It would
It was
be-
always going to have
Anything-
to go through.
Anything that comes in to do this development would have to go through the administrative subdivision process, or if it's 50 lots or greater, would still come through the preliminary plat process with Planning Commission. It's by right in that it doesn't require a rezoning or a conditional use permit for the zoning aspect of it, but it still does, people will have to design the subdivision and lay it out, which would require a subdivision process, regardless.
Not inevitable that you'd have to tear the house down. It could be a consequence of a proposal if wasn't able to conform, make some conformance. But it's not an imperative impediment.
I'd also add maybe just one more thing for context. The scenario that you're talking about is not very common within town. So most of the developed areas we're not talking about lots that are an acre and a half with one house on them. That's a
In
pretty
R4.
Yeah, in R4,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
In other districts, certainly maybe within RR1 or some of those others where this would not apply. But most of our R4 districts are either undeveloped, or they might have one unit on a much larger parcel, or they're developed closer to the R4 standard.
Okay, but then let's just replace my question with four properties that are adjacent to each other, that have four houses that are on 30-foot setbacks. And in other words, is there a way for this to give, maybe it's too late, but is there a way for this to give staff some latitude?
It's not intended for infill, so it's not gonna be, it's in an area that's developed close to or at the R4 standard. It's not going to create an opportunity for infill in those areas.
I think there's some communities, I wish I could remember where, I thought I was reading about one community that went to this small lot, and there actually were areas with houses already that actually there was sort of an active desire to take, they were so not what was desired, and so kind of old and a little bit broken down, that in fact that was what happened, right? It was, I can't remember if it was in North Carolina, but it was in really great, sort of in the middle of the town, and this represented, you know, the way that's happening in Dallas, where people are buying these 1960s houses, and the first thing they're doing is tearing them down, which is awful.
And the market will dictate that, right?
Right.
So nobody's going to tear down, like you say, perfectly good houses. The
Right.
market, it doesn't make market sense to do that. But when you have underused properties, let's say they're vacant, abandoned, not making anybody money, and they happen to be all in a line, then this does create an incentive to buy multiple properties, clear the units, and put in new ones. Yeah.
Thank you, you said that much better than I did.
Well, my everyday.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept, and I do think we will probably see some properties amassed, you know, and developed in some fashion, I would think. Think Marlington, that area. Yeah. Any additional questions for Collie? And I assume we have no public comment then, as we have no public. Do we have a motion?
I move approval of zoning ordinance amendment number 61.
Second.
Any additional discussion?
I just want to say that I'm very hopeful that this will increase the variety of housing available in Blacksburg, particularly in some developments that have been kind of noodled on for a long time by the people who own them. And I'm also excited for people to experience that variety and the diversity that it brings, and I hope that it does exactly what we anticipate, which is encourage changes like this in other zones in Blacksburg. And I do hope that it acts as an incentive to do, you know, some redevelopment where homes are in poor condition or, you know, do need to be addressed in the sort of redevelopment scenario. I think it's a nice first step, and I'll look forward to the next ones.
Thank you for those comments. We have a motion on the dais for approval. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All right. We will move on to citizen comment, which, as we have no citizens, we'll have no comment. Unfinished business, zoning ordinance review committee, we have not met. Historic or design review board.
It's a good question. Let me remember. There was a discussion, I initiated a discussion based on our discussions in here. And especially those that were talking about upcoming zoning, looking at the zoning again as it relates to Hadarb. So I think it was, most of the things that are relevant to this panel would be things that I kind of took to them, and I don't think there's anything that should go back up that I can think of.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question about that. How does what's going on with Oddfellows fit into that committee?
Here's what's going on with,
Member?
is it Oh, Oddfellows. I know of nothing related to Oddfellows that was before Hidarb in the last couple of months. I don't know.
Okay, there is a town work committee that's looking at what needs to happen with Oddfellows. I think it's just sort of slipped through the cracks in terms of keeping up in some areas. So right now, there's a combined committee of people looking at moving forward with Oddfellows.
Bill Green, who's on that on the Hidarb committee, was instrumental in salvaging Oddfellows. That's my understanding. Some 25 years
Right.
ago or something. But other than that, I know of no other link between Hidarb and Oddfellows.
Okay, just checking. It seems like it would fall as
So
well
Hidarb-
into updating that area if I.
Yeah, Hidarb's kind of purview is whatever is considered a contributing structure within the map. And there's sometimes it's kind of curious and head scratching which homes are included, or which buildings are included and which ones are not. They're generally the ones you would think, but they're generally not all the ones you would think. So I'm not sure if that one's covered. I would think it might be, but I'm not sure.
It's not within the district, and it's fairly far outside of the district in terms of what Hidarb reviews within their purview.
Okay.
There's a lot of 16 squares.
So it's strictly the.
It's, yeah.
It follows the Blacksburg Historic District overlay, and that mapping area covers the 16 squares and kind of reaches up Lee Street a little bit and then out along Progress Street a little bit, but actually stays, on Main Street it ends in maybe the 400 block of North Main is where it ends, and then it doesn't cover anything beyond that. It also doesn't, there are some other areas that are historically significant, like the Newtown area and the Draper Miller South Side neighborhood. Also, some of those have national recognition, but don't have a local district that covers it. So it really is only that one downtown. It's called the Blacksburg Historic District. It's just the title name, but it doesn't cover anything outside of that.
I will also add that John Gray Williams, who's on the Hidarb board, is leaving because he's moving to Christiansburg because
Shut
he's
up.
been, what's that?
No, go on. It was nothing relevant.
He's been trying to look in Blacksburg, but just can't find anything that he can afford. And so I kind of channeled my inner Mel and said, this is one of the things that we want to make sure we're not making it impossible for someone like him to stay, where he feels like he has to move to Christiansburg in order to afford something that he's been looking for years in Blacksburg. And insofar as the work that we're doing in Hidarb, we need to be thinking about whether or not we even need to be thinking about these things when we're trying to preserve some of the things that we're interested in preserving. So these are, that's one place where there are a lot of places where everything kind of aligns, where we can get walkability and affordability and preserve our quality of life. But there are some other places where maybe there's a conflict, and certainly that was laid bare in the last meeting last Monday.
Thank you for those comments. Montgomery County Planning Commission?
That was supposed to be me. And I should have gone, but I do want to still raise the fact that I don't get a packet or any kind of anything from them in advance. Still.
I'll double check
You don't get
with
the email
them.
because they're sending it via email, like a link. You're not.
No.
I don't either. I didn't either, whenever that was, way back in January.
Okay, I'll double check. I think they were sending it to the planning commission as a whole rather than individuals, is how
Yeah,
they had
I
addressed
mean-
that, so
I'm not. And is it only coming to the town emails? Because still my town email does not work.
okay.
Yes, if it's the town email.
You. I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
I think, though, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was there, April, whenever that was, they were getting ready to start broadcasting, televising their meetings. So you,
I could go back
so
and
you
have
may
them
be
do
able to
some
go
homework.
back and
I like
check
that.
it out. And the other thing is, it's live, I believe, which means you can watch from the comfort of your own home. All of us can watch from the comfort of our own home in the future, when it's our turn.
Yes.
Great, thanks. Any additional items from planning commissioners?
I did just want to say with Holly going on sabbatical, and I didn't have a chance to say this when Ann left, but I am extremely appreciative of the talent and commitment and patience and thoroughness of our staff, and that definitely, having worked with you on a couple of committees early on, I cannot tell you enough how appreciative I am of you having been a part of this town.
Thank you. Appreciate
I
it.
second that motion.
Absolutely.
All in favor?
Very true. Thank you for that. New business, chair's report. I don't have a report, but I would like to welcome Blaine Cassey to the Planning Commission. Blaine is a retired design professional, landscape architect who's brought several applications before the Planning Commission and has done a wonderful job, and we're lucky to have him, and thank you for being willing to bring your expertise to this group. Appreciate it. Planning Director's report.
I have none.
Town Council report.
Today at work session, we had the first pass on what we voted on tonight. Also, the staff did a really great presentation of kind of where they, this whole idea of redoing the zoning ordinance and improving it. We had that in our work session where we brainstormed things. So today was presented to us kind of a compilation of what came out of council, came out of this group, came out of staff. So town council kind of blessed it to continue to move forward and try to develop a scope of work for that. Another thing today that was presented to us is over the years, you know, as we've done CUPs or we've done rezonings, we've run across different times where standards couldn't be met and we had to have variances. We all remember our Glade Spring variance party last year. And so there's this work group looking at the zoning ordinance and figuring out ways that the process can be improved at the by right level and just to clean some of that up.
Nice.
Combined with the zoning ordinance thing. So there's a lot of good work starting right now to modernize and clean up and make things easier for people to understand and implement. And then I just wanted to address LaTanya's question. There is a town committee work group, I guess, that consists of citizens, town staff, people from the Blacksburg Museum who works to manage the Oddfellows Hall. They've all been working for several months, and so that's kind of where it stands. Town council hasn't been briefed specifically. We haven't had a briefing yet where things are. I believe in August the annual agreement for the management of Oddfellows via the Blacksburg Museum is up. So I suspect later this month or into August we'll be briefed a little more on the status of Oddfellows.
That's good to know. I wasn't aware of any benchmarks or necessarily that were set for that conversation in August.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just trying to figure out how it fit into the puzzle. I wasn't trying to make a statement.
Okay. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that town council report. And with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you for attending.